Hi everyone, my name is Leary. I'm a developer advocate in part of IBM's Watson IoT business. And I'm here today to talk to you about Node-RED, a tool we've created that makes it easy to wire up applications for the Internet of Things. Before I was a developer advocate, I worked in our emerging technologies group based here in the UK, our IBM Hursley location. And as a group, we would do a lot of first-of-a-kind, proof-of-concept type projects for clients, often on very short timescales, 1 or 2 week-long engagements. And it was doing those sorts of engagements where wanting to very quickly build a solution, often wiring together different streams of events, whether it's GPS data coming over a serial port, or sharing onto social media streams, whatever it might be. We recognized that we were writing the same code again and again, boilerplate code, such as how you access a serial device or how you access online data. And as part of the role, looking at how we can learn new technologies and just innovate around our job, we came up with this idea of a tool that would help you build those sorts of applications in a very graphical way, where you wouldn't have to worry about the boilerplate bits of code, that you could just drop those into place and start wiring your application together, much as you would wire a circuit together. And that's what came of Node-RED. So Node-RED, and as we call it, it's a visual tool for wiring the Internet of Things. One of the challenges with IoT is just the whole concept is about putting together different streams of data, whether they're physical or digital. And really, there's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. And one of the challenges with IoT is the tooling and how you can create applications that are meaningful and successful quickly, because it does cut across so many different domains, whether it's web technologies, whether it's interacting with hardware, or wherever it might be. So looking at Node-RED as a tool to help you do those sorts of things, on reflection, we liken it now to the Office suite of tools. So if you think of the word processors or spreadsheets or presentation software, they're tools that help you work in different medium, whether it's working with words, numbers, or ideas. They're tools that anyone can pick up and do something with. You don't need to be a prize-winning author in order to be able to use a word processor to write a shopping list or to just write a letter. You don't need to be a maths PhD in order to use a spreadsheet. You can do it very simple, balancing your home finances, but these are all tools that do provide capability to the more advanced users. So whatever experience and whatever ability you come to the tool with, these are tools that are flexible across a wide range of abilities. And we recognize there's no sort of equivalent tool for when you want to work with Internet of Things type problems. And what are Internet of Things type problems? Well, they're problems which deal with events. Things happen, and you want to define some sort of behavior and how you want to react to that thing happening. It could be a physical event, like a sensor reading coming in on a device. It could be a digital event, like someone has tweeted something. What is the tooling to help you pull together those different streams? Going back to the sorts of projects we were doing, the sort of innovative client projects, often it would be, how can we quickly build something that starts off with just spotting that something has happened and reacting? And maybe in the first instance, you want to alert the team. But in the next iteration, you want to kick off some automated business process, or maybe you just want some light or alert to ping. So if you've not seen Node-RED, hopefully this video is coming through okay on the screencast. You install Node-RED and you can run it on a local device in the cloud, and then you point your web browser at it. Here we have the Node-RED editor, and you have this palette of nodes down the left-hand side, and those represent the discrete bits of capability within Node-RED. So in this instance, I've added a Twitter node that knows how to talk to the Twitter API, and it's looking for any tweet using the Star Wars hashtag, and a debug node that makes messages appear in this right-hand column. And I've wired those together and hit deploy, and that's now running. Here, I'm adding a Mongo database node that I've just configured for details of a local database. And all I have to do is just give it the name of the collection I want to store information in. And I wire the Twitter node to the database node and hit deploy. And those tweets are now being stored in the database. So this video, it's all real time. I recorded this on the day of The Force Awakens, in fact, a little while ago now. So there's a good amount of friendly data coming through on the tweets. So let's do something, excuse me, let's do something interesting with that data. So we're going to put it up on a web page. So Node-RED lets you define HTTP endpoints that you can point web browsers at or create REST APIs. So here I'm configuring an HTTP endpoint for get requests to /tweets, a Mongo query node to go get the data from the database. And I'm just adding here a template node. And the template node will take a message and can render it using a standard templating format. So I'm just pasting in any moment now, just a simple bit of HTML using the templating format that will just list out all of the messages from the database. I hit deploy, and now when I go to this URL with /tweets and load it, here is a very plain looking list of all the tweets we've captured in the database. And that's very much at the heart of what Node-RED is about. It's about breaking up problems into discrete steps. It's recognizing that you can solve a problem by understanding what are the steps you need to take. And it turns out this is not a new idea by any means. And in fact, it turns out IBM invented the concept of flow-based programming back in the 1970s, which is what Node-RED is an embodiment of. J. Paul Morrison described it as creating this network of asynchronous processes. Each process communicates through streams of structured data chunks. And a key point is that each process, each black box, or each node in the Node-RED sense, doesn't know what comes before it, it doesn't know what comes after it. It's just given some data, it processes it, and it passes the result on. And that's what Node-RED is all about. It's about creating applications by adding the nodes to your flow, where each node represents some sort of capability, and then wiring together those nodes to represent how you want the data, the messages to flow. The messages themselves are simple JavaScript objects with key value pairs. So they are free-form messages. They can have whatever data you want in them. But one of the benefits of flow-based programming is you want the nodes to just work when they wire together. So by excuse me. So by convention, the nodes, the messages will have this payload property, and that's where we say the interesting information goes. So in the case of the Twitter node, the text, the 140 characters, or 280 if you're lucky enough, characters of your tweet go in the payload property. But it is a free-form JavaScript object. So in fact, the Twitter node will also attach a property called tweet, and that includes the entire kilobyte of data that the Twitter API returns. But the key thing is, by convention, nodes will set and work with the payload property. So if we look for an example of one of the nodes we have in the default palette of Node-RED, is a sentiment analysis node. This is a very simple node that uses a standard library. It looks at the individual words in the payload it's passed, and each word has a score associated with it. So it produces a total sentiment score for the text. So here, we pass in a tweet that says, Jedi are totally amazing. It flows through the sentiment node, and in this instance, the sentiment node doesn't modify the payload, but it adds a new property to the message, a sentiment property, with a score, in this instance 4, because it's a nice positive message. So going back to our example, we're just going to now update this to make use of some of those features. So I'm adding in a function node to my second flow here. The function node lets me write some JavaScript code, because sometimes you need to do some custom work that isn't embodied in an existing node. And here, I'm setting a message.sort property and a message.limit property. These are properties that the Mongo query node, the next node in the flow, respond to. So when I deploy and refresh my page, hopefully you can now see we get the 5 most recent tweets from the database. So the next thing we're going to do is improve the look of those tweets and do some sentiment analysis, much like I showed or described on the previous slide. So there's our sentiment analysis node. We drop that in. It doesn't need any configuration because it will just work with the message.payload the Twitter node emits. I drop in a function node, and with a bit of JavaScript I've already written, which I'll just paste in there. I examine the sentiment score, and if it's positive or negative, I add another property to the message with that word, positive or negative. And now I go into the template that renders our tweets in the HTTP flow. So let's just rewind a small bit just to keep up with where we were. So Node-RED isn't doing code generation. Whenever you hit that deploy button, it's packaging up your flow configuration and generating a JSON representation of your flow. That JSON representation, essentially it's an array of objects. Each object in that array is one of your nodes. And that holds how each of those nodes is configured. And the Node-RED runtime takes that configuration and then builds a runtime version of your flow. Each node in the palette is defined by a pair of files. An HTML file that just defines how the node appears in the editor, its edit dialog, its help text, those sorts of things. The JavaScript file is loaded into the runtime as a Node.js module, and that is actually the runtime behavior of the node. That is what's given that JSON representation of a node and is the black box that knows what to do with it. Those JavaScript and HTML files are packaged up as NPM modules. So along with a standard package.json file, if you're familiar with the Node.js packaging system, with a bit of additional metadata in there to help Node-RED know what's in a node. And those nodes can then be published to the public Node.js Package Manager repository, NPM. And this is a key thing with Node-RED. Node-RED is completely open source. So we've been working on Node-RED since the beginning of 2013, and we first published it as an open source project on GitHub in September of that year. And then in October last year, we moved the project from being an IBM-supported, purely IBM project to being a project of the JavaScript Foundation. So that puts us in a great stead of being in a home with many other really good JavaScript projects, some really interesting IoT technologies in there as well, and basically gives us a much more open governance model around the project. It's fully open source, so anyone can contribute both to the runtime, the editor, the core nodes. And we have a very active Google group and Slack channel that if you want more information, more help, come along and get involved. So I mentioned nodes can be published. When nodes get published to the public NPM repository, they get automatically indexed by the flow library. At the time I created this slide, there was over 1,000 third-party nodes available for Node-RED. That's now more like 12 or 1,300 nodes available. And that's the real power of Node-RED, the extensibility of the platform, because anyone can write a node for the technology they want to interact with, and then share it with the community for others to benefit from. So there are nodes for all sorts of different hardware devices, web APIs, all sorts of different things out there. One of the things that Node-RED, one of the things we didn't focus on for a long time with Node-RED was doing anything around visualizing data. We were much more about creating applications and the logic and the flow of messages. But someone in the community thought it'd be really cool to be able to create dashboards for data with using Node-RED. So they created a set of nodes and published them to the community called Node-RED Dashboard. And we've since adopted these into the core project because they are just so useful. So this Node-RED Dashboard gives you a bunch of nodes in the editor that you can wire into your flows that automatically generate a web page with corresponding widgets on. So there are chart nodes, there are gauges, sliders, HTML inputs, a whole range of different widgets for both visualizing data, but also being able to interact and send and make the data interactive. So, for example, here we've got a bunch of sliders wired up to gauges, various other widgets going on there. And when I switch to the corresponding dashboard page, as I change the slider, you can see the data changing in various widgets. So Node-RED Dashboard makes a really easy way to very quickly create a UI for your data. It's very opinionated in appearance and theming. You can customize the theming, but it's really there as a starting point to create your own UIs. And there are since other projects that provide similar sorts of capabilities with Node-RED, but leave more of the coding to you to make it truly custom to your application. So I've sort of skirted around and not explicitly said, so Node-RED is built on top of Node.js. So Node.js, if you're not familiar, is the server-side JavaScript runtime. And Node-RED runs as happily on small devices like the Raspberry Pi as it does in cloud environments like IBM Bluemix, or now known as just the IBM Cloud. And in fact, for the projects where we started Node-RED, it was very much on the Raspberry Pi that we started, because it was that was the sort of device we were plugging random things into for our client projects. And in fact, for the last 18 months or so, Node-RED has come pre-installed on the Raspberry Pi. So if you have a Raspberry Pi with a recent version of Raspbian on, then you already have Node-RED in the programming. And that makes it has made it instantly accessible to a huge audience, from educational users through to the home hobbyists and professionals. In the cloud, Node-RED is there as one of the boilerplate applications as part of the Bluemix platform. So with the new free accounts, which you can sign up for a perpetually free account with no commitment, you can get an instance of Node-RED up and running in the cloud. And what's interesting there is colleagues have created a bunch of nodes for a number of the Bluemix services, like the Watson cognitive services. So you can very quickly start creating applications in the cloud that can interact with data, can interact with cognitive services, all benefiting from the ease of use of Node-RED. And as an open source project, others have started picking up and doing things with it. There are a number of online hosted versions of Node-RED provided by a variety of companies. We're also seeing many companies embed Node-RED as part of commercial devices like gateways, Multitech, Opto22, a bunch of others. And indeed, Node-RED is part of the IoT Gateway Developer Hub. So when you run it, for example, on the Intel NUC or something like that, you've got Node-RED there helping you create your IoT applications really easily on the device, sending data up into the cloud. And that, for a developer experience, that then gets really interesting. So you can run Node-RED on devices, on gateways, on Raspberry Pis, on the NUC, wherever it might be, but things at the edge of the network. You can then use something like the IBM Watson IoT platform to connect those devices securely, reliably to a cloud environment. And then you can be running Node-RED in the cloud as well, receiving that data and doing things with it, interacting with the other Watson services. So for a quick example, a demo I have here on my desk is a Slack bot that lets me have a chat with an agent to control the Raspberry Pi. So how does that work? Well, these are the basic building blocks. Within Slack, I've created a bot integration and just gotten an API token from the Slack API. In Node-RED, someone has already created a Slack node to interact with their API. So I just add that to my Node-RED instance, drag it in, I paste in the API key that Slack gave me. And there and then, whenever I instant message that bot or direct message that bot in Slack, my Node-RED instance running in the cloud receives that message. In this case, I've used the Watson Conversation Service, which lets me define how I want an intelligent conversation to happen. You can define entities, the things I want to talk about, intents, the subjects of what I want to talk about. So I can train it to recognize many different ways of how I want to say, turn on a light. And this is using the power of the Watson Context Services to learn how a user might want to express something, and it will recognize that. And then I can define a dialogue for what responses, what questions should be sent back. Putting that all together, I can wire the Slack bot straight into the conversation service. And then with a bit of function nodes around the outside of that, put it back into Slack, at which point, whenever I send a direct message to my bot in Slack, it sends me something back from the Watson Conversation Service. Building into the conversation service, this idea of recognizing that the user now wants to do something with a little bit of logic in my flow, I can then trigger an action. And in this instance, I've added in an IBM IoT node. So that is a node that lets me publish a command down to a device in a very secure and safe way. So down on my device, on my Raspberry Pi, where I've also got Node-RED running, I've got a Watson IoT node listening for those commands. And those commands, a function node just recognizes that command, and in this instance, sends a message to a SenseHat node. So a SenseHat is an add-on to the Raspberry Pi that has a LED matrix on, and a good example of the sorts of accessories on a Raspberry Pi that people have written nodes to interact with already. So it's that easy on the Raspberry Pi to start controlling the device using Slack, using Node-RED and the Watson services. And it's, from a developer experience, the key is it's the same developer experience on the device as it is in the cloud. It's the flow-based programming model of breaking a problem into individual steps and wiring them together. So I wanted to show a few examples of where companies other than ourselves have started doing really interesting things with Node-RED. The first one I've got here, this one I'm showing you here, is a bridge in Montreal, I believe. Montreal, Quebec. I always go blank on that one. But it's a bridge in a major Canadian city, the Jacques Cartier Bridge. And it has all these lighting effects across the struts of the bridge. And the company, Moment Factory, who did this installation, have built this to illuminate the bridge based on various bits of IoT data from the city: traffic, weather, pollution, social sentiment, a whole variety of sources. And they've used Node-RED to actually control all the lighting effects on this bridge. Yeah, it's a great example. Another example of an industrial controller, or industrial gateway company, Interior Automation, or IA Connects, as they've recently renamed themselves. They've created their product called Mobius Flow, which again, it's a gateway device that interfaces with building management systems, with lighting, heating controllers, that sort of thing. And they've provided Node-RED on their device as the developer experience for the building owner. Because the building owner isn't a programmer. They know how they know the behaviors they want in a building. They know how they can express the basic logic of that behavior. And Node-RED gives them that abstraction they need in order to express that behavior and control the device. At another extreme, HoverAid are a charity who provide aid in hard-to-reach places using hovercrafts. And part of their sort of charitable community, they knew they were having issues monitoring a particular part of the hovercraft engine that would overheat and take a hovercraft out of service. So an electrical engineer built very quickly a little temperature probe that could be retrofitted to the hovercraft. And then installing Node-RED on an Android tablet using Node-RED dashboard, he's created quite a rugged sensor readout of the temperature probe he'd created. So within the hovercraft, they can monitor parts of the engine that weren't otherwise being monitored. And it's not all about IoT. Because Node-RED lets you very easily create REST services, we've seen examples of, the high-level architecture shown here was the back end to a mobile banking application, where building it in the IBM cloud, they created 9 instances of Node-RED, each handling a different part of the API, with an API gateway, API connect in front, providing the security and load balancing, that type of stuff. And they very quickly created, for this proof of concept, the back end needed for a mobile banking application in Node-RED, in a nice sort of scalable microservice type approach. Again, away from IoT type stories, Spirit AI, a games company who provide intelligent agents for game chat. And what they wanted to be able to do was take live streams of chat data from real-world games and be able to have their analysts define behaviors for when different types of bad behavior were spotted in terms of how the game and characters in the game should react. And they use Node-RED, again, as an abstraction for the domain expert, the linguist, the analyst, to be able to express the flow of behavior they wanted to, that they wanted the game agents to follow. And it's that level of abstraction that Node-RED brings that really makes it accessible to a wide range of audience, whether it is the person who doesn't know how to program but can break a problem up into discrete steps, all the way through to someone who's more than happy to write the lines of code, but they know they can be more effective if they don't have to write individual lines of code. Another example are the animatronic dinosaurs. I always wonder why I preface that saying they're animatronic, because clearly it is not a real dinosaur. But this is on a theme park in the UK, where they were installed quite a few years ago and supplied by, I believe, a Chinese company. And the park owner wanted to be able to customize the behavior of these dinosaurs to cope with when certain motors were failing or whatever it might have been. So a community in the local area retrofitted some Raspberry Pis to these dinosaurs and used Node-RED on those Raspberry Pis to control these dinosaurs. So that's a great example of, again, using the Raspberry Pi to interface with existing hardware and using Node-RED to provide a UI that the park engineers are not programmers. They're more sort of mechanical engineers. But again, they can express the behaviors they want in a way that Node-RED allows them to do that. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming up, what have we got planned next. For any of you who've used Node-RED, may well have hit perhaps some of the pain points around it. We created it very consciously as a single user development environment. It's you developing on a Raspberry Pi. But there are many scenarios where it isn't just you. You want to be able to collaborate with a team. You're developing your solution, which involves more than just Node-RED. There are other assets that need adding in to be part of the entire solution. So we identified a number of themes for the project for the coming months, and some of the pain points that we want to be able to address. How we can improve the workflow from making an individual developer more effective to supporting modern development practices like having a full tool chain, from having continuous integration and deployment pipelines, that type of thing. How we can improve collaboration, sharing assets, those sorts of things. But also extensibility. How can we allow people to take Node-RED and reuse it in new and interesting ways? How can we tease apart some of the componentry of Node-RED to allow some maximum reuse? How can we help scale Node-RED? Certainly there are good, well-established patterns for scaling Node-RED to accommodate workloads. But there's more we could do to make that easier. And also ensure we've got a good, stable API for those who want to build on top of Node-RED, embed Node-RED, give them confidence moving forward. So early in the summer, we published our roadmap to get us to version 1.0, looking at how those different themes and how we can prioritize those different bits of some very specific technical pieces of work. For example, version control. Everyone takes version control for granted. It is, if you're developing modern software, you just need version control. And today, that's something you have to do outside of Node-RED. You have to manually version the flow file that Node-RED generates. Well, in our next release, we're going to have version control built into the editor directly. So you'll be able to interact with your project as more than just a flow file. It's a project with other files, other assets, and allow you to manage the versioning of all those files, basically using a local Git repository, but also allow you to work with a remote Git repository. So when you're a team developing together, you can actually commit and do the standard Git flow, developing locally, and then when you're ready, you can then push those changes remotely. And then we can also take advantage of, well, how do you compare flow changes? We already have a contextual flow diff view in Node-RED, so help the user understand what has changed when they're comparing different versions. We're going to redesign the library in Node-RED. So the library is a bit where you can save useful snippets of code already, but at the moment that's entirely local. It's on the device running Node-RED. So we're going to look at how can we extend that to allow you to have a remote repository. So again, as a team of developers, you can have a pool of shared resources that you want to each individual developer to be able to draw on when they're creating their Node-RED flows. And thinking around how you manage versioning and updates to those shared assets across different Node-RED instances. One of the perhaps less obvious to the end user features we're looking at is splitting out the editor from the runtime. So currently they are packaged as a single object, and we're going to look at separating the packaging out so they become two distinct things. Node-RED as it exists today would still exist today as almost like a meta package that pulled those two things together. But for people who wanted to be able to, for example, put a custom runtime behind the Node-RED editor, then they would be able to do that. Or perhaps they want to create a multi-user version of Node-RED, where everyone accesses the same editor, but each user is actually accessing a different Node-RED runtime. There are lots of different possible architectures. Splitting those two out will enable. There are some other internal changes around, for example, context. So if you're familiar with Node-RED, context is how nodes can store state between individual messages. And we're going to enable that to be stored outside of the Node-RED runtime to allow it to be persistable. We're also going to add pluggable routing. So how a message flows from node to node. Make that a pluggable, customizable component. That enables a lot of interesting use cases. For example, a debugger. So you can actually set breakpoints in your flows. So if you're interested and want to play more with Node-RED, I say it is an open source project. It's there in Bluemix. It's there on the Raspberry Pi. If you have Node.js installed locally, you can npm install it today and start using it. If you're a Docker user, then we publish Docker containers. And I say, also they're available to work with the IBM Cloud. In terms of online resources, there's a lot to learn. We've started creating a Node-RED cookbook. So this is trying to create a very recipe-oriented set of examples of what you can do with Node-RED. That's in its very early days at the moment. And if people wondering how can they get involved with the Node-RED community, this is a great place to get started. Jump onto the Slack channel. We have our docs channel, and there's a group of people looking at how we can build out the docs and improve them. last year, we published a Coursera course, The Developer's Guide to the Internet of Things. So this is a good example course for how to build an IoT application that uses Node-RED. And if you're a fan of Coursera, watch this space, because we'll be following this course up with a developer's guide to Node-RED in the very near future. So keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in the Watson services as part of the Bluemix Cloud Cognitive Services, the Watson Developer Cloud team have created a whole host of example flows using a lot of those nodes that they've written to interact with the Watson services. So speech to text, text to speech, the conversation service, text analytics, a whole range, dozens of different services available, and great labs are available there. And something that took us by surprise is there's a really strong and vibrant Node-RED community in Japan. So some time ago we saw there's actually a Node-RED book in Japanese that we've not yet learned enough Japanese to read for ourselves, but it is there. And recently, one of the various companies who are looking at Node-RED and choosing to adopt it is Hitachi. So they have made a strong statement around their commitment to the project moving forward, to the extent that they have also written their own book in Japanese introducing you to Node-RED. So that's Node-RED in a nutshell. So covered a bit about the concept of Node-RED and where it's come from and why we wrote it, what it does, how it can be extended by creating nodes, and how others are using it for the sorts of things they do. That's the end of my slides. But in the meantime, if anyone had any questions, then we've still got some time here. I'm happy to help out with any questions you have about Node-RED, how you may be able to get started with it. Some of the questions coming in. Let's have a look. So time frame for the roadmap. I see a question there. When we published the roadmap, we set perhaps an ambitious timeline to try and get there by end of this year, early next year. Now, the roadmap is entirely dependent on the contributors to the project being able to deliver through the really quite ambitious technical work in that roadmap. So it's going to take a bit longer than that. The project version control type functionality is coming along very nicely, and I'm really excited to get that out, and hopefully we'll get that out within the next month. And that's going to be a major step forward. And then we'll see how it develops from there. There are a number of people starting to contribute to the project, and clearly the more contributors we get, the easier it is to get through this timeline to deliver on this roadmap. So a question about validating nodes before they're published. Currently, as long as people follow our packaging guidelines and the basic requirements that our documentation set out, then the flow library will automatically index the nodes. One of the challenges then is, it's a nice problem to have, with 1,300 nodes, is clearly some are higher quality than others. So we do want to look at how in the flow library we can allow the community to help provide feedback on individual nodes and help provide some sort of rating or quality feedback on individual nodes, so we can be sure that the good quality nodes are much more apparent in the library. We want to try and avoid doing individual validation and gatekeeping to the flow library. We want to try and keep it open. So a question around the next release. As I say, hopefully in the next month or so, we'll be doing the 18 release with version control in. Clearly, that's going to be dependent on a number of factors, but that's the sort of timescale we're looking at. Intel has indeed created a number of libraries for its UPM and MIA stuff, and yes, there are nodes that work with those sensors. So the Gateway Hub that Intel has included in Node-RED includes those nodes, and you can interact with sensors using those nodes and those libraries already. Popular flows and modules for home automation. Well, there are nodes for all sorts of different types of hardware, whether it's sort of Wemo or all the sort of typical home automation type devices out there today. There are nodes in existence for most of them. So it very much depends what you have. We're seeing some interesting nodes being created to create Alexa skills, for example, and interact with Alexa. Some really interesting stuff going on there. So the flexibility of the platform really does reflect the fact it depends what hardware you have. To what you want to be able to do and how you want to interact with it. So is the Pi the lowest practical hardware device that can support Node-RED? So the key thing is it runs on Node.js. So wherever you can run Node.js, you can run Node-RED. So we have seen it run on lower powered devices than the Pi, but they are still devices with Linux operating system. It isn't something you could run on a microcontroller like an Arduino or things like that. But we do have some great recipes for how you can interact with Arduinos from Node-RED running on a Pi or on a NUC or wherever it might be. And that uses the Fermata image that you can put onto the Arduino that gives you a standard comms protocol over the serial connection to the Arduino from the device running Node-RED. So, as I said, most of the work we do on the Raspberry Pi, but that's just reflecting the sorts of projects we've done. We have seen it go on smaller powered devices, but the key is they are devices that are able to run a Linux operating system or an operating system with Node.js. So a question whether 1.0 would be production ready for commercial use. Well, this is one of the reasons we've held off calling a release 1.0. Because we're kind of stuck to semantic versioning. Because normally a change to the first number represents a breaking change to previous versions in terms of compatibility. And we haven't done that. A flow that you deployed on September 2013 will still run just as happily on a Node-RED instance from today. But we recognize the lack of a 1.0 version number has held some people back. I've shown plenty of examples of commercial vendors who are using Node-RED in production today at 0.17 and earlier in commercial settings. So it all depends on what your use case is. And as with any software, any technology you choose to use in a production setting, you need to evaluate that software as suitable for your use case. So, the evidence shows there are people using it in production today, and we would fully endorse that. I'm not here saying it is not suitable for production. It is. But the move to 1.0 is really there to give that firm commitment and firm underlying statement that, yes, this project could for production, and also we've addressed some of the pain points around workflow and developer experience that we've had there. So Amit, your question, so is the information about the particular devices stored in JSON format in case of Node-RED? Not entirely clear what you mean with that question. If perhaps you want to reword it to clarify slightly. So the JSON format is the configuration of the nodes. So each key value pair represents the configuration of the nodes. So it will depend on what the runtime component of that node wants to be able to do for what it does with that JSON. And that's a key point, as I said earlier. Node-RED isn't generating JavaScript code you can then customize. You would embed Node-RED as a runtime and feed it the JSON flow. So a question for the software for Arduino to control it over serial. So that was Fermata, F-I-R-M-A-T-A. So it's a standard software sketch that you can burn to the Arduino to control it over the serial link. Supports most of the Arduino microcontrollers out there. Yeah, good stuff. I mean, that is separate to Node-RED,
but it is what the Node-RED Arduino nodes make use of in order to provide that interaction and capability. It lets you toggle the digital pins. It lets you control PWM on the Arduino, a whole bunch of stuff on the Arduino, controlling it from the serial connected device. So we see Node-RED used in a wide range of industries and technology areas. So a question, do I think it's useful for energy apps, like sort of energy monitoring, that type of stuff? Absolutely. Again, one of the first things I was using it at home was gathering energy readings from my home. I've got a clamp on my home meter, gathering data from that and publishing it to the cloud. So I have access to energy data. We see it used in retail scenarios. We've seen it used in insurance scenarios, a whole range of different industries, anywhere where you want to be able to create an application that's reacting to events. And that isn't one particular industry. IoT as a technology applies to, in some form, to every industry, to every business. There's opportunity around IoT. It may not always be apparent and obvious, but the opportunities are there. And having tools like Node-RED that help you develop quickly and easily applications to explore a problem space are really valuable to help innovate and iterate solutions quickly. So is there a plan for an edge version of Node-RED? Well, Node-RED already runs at the edge. You could, so a pattern we see often is using Node-RED alongside, for example, a Mosquitto MQTT broker, and using the Mosquitto MQTT broker as the sort of store and forward capability to connect to a remote MQTT system. That is just one choice. We've seen others do it in many different ways using other external technology choices. The point is Node-RED is flexible enough with its palette of nodes, with its points of integration, to interact with many different systems. So, Node-RED is a piece of the tool chain. It isn't going to do absolutely everything in an IoT solution, but it provides an important part of wiring together those streams of events. So a couple questions. So can you use it on a Raspberry Pi? Absolutely. As I've said, Node-RED is pre-installed on the Raspberry Pi. So if you have Raspbian, look under the programming menu and you'll already find Node-RED there. Can you run it on your Android phone? You can. We have seen this done. There is an app you can install on your Android phone called Tmux that lets you basically get a terminal on your phone that lets you install Node.js and then install Node-RED. It's a bit, layers upon layers. It's not, shall we say, it is not our target platform, but people in the community have figured that out. So it is not something I've done personally. So do have a search on Google and you will find some examples of how people have done that. I guess the key message with Node-RED is, it is an open source project of the JS Foundation, so it is openly governed. Its shape and its direction is formed by the community of users, by the people who engage with the project. Our roadmap is based entirely on the feedback from both the commercial vendors who have adopted Node-RED, as well as just the individuals we chat to every day in Slack or on the mailing list about what's good, what's bad about Node-RED. So if you're interested to get more involved, do sign up to our Slack channel. If you go to our website, nodered.org, all the details are there. I just get started. There's a ton of resources out there, whether you're looking to get started on a Raspberry Pi, in the cloud, wherever it might be. There are example recipes to do a ton of stuff. And it's really over to you and your imagination for what you want to start doing with it. Ultimately, Node-RED is a programming platform. It's just another programming language. So what you can create is limited only by what you choose to be able to do with it. I say, open source. It's there to play with. And our focus is very much on that developer experience. How do we make a tool that is accessible to a wide range of audiences, from the school kid learning how to program, the seasoned electrical engineer, all the way up to the professional programmer who just wants to do something quickly and not have to worry about that boilerplate code. So a question I've just seen coming around, is there an official snap for Ubuntu Core? We haven't done an official one, but I believe I remember seeing someone had created a snap for Ubuntu Core, but it isn't something I've looked at recently. It is one of the things on my to-do list to go check up on. So certainly have a look, and you may well find one there. I think one of the, and I probably keep saying this, the interesting thing we see with Node-RED is just that diverse audience who have taken to Node-RED and who have been empowered by tooling that lets them be productive without getting in their way. Going back to that analogy of the spreadsheet, and I hope you can see here how if you have a problem, if you think back to the video I showed where I wanted to put tweets on a web page with sentiment analysis applied, that involved virtually no programming. I probably spent more time creating the HTML and the CSS of the template to get that looking good than I did on the logical flow of my application. And that's because if you put yourself in the shoes of a sort of domain expert or an analyst, whatever it might be, they understand the problem domain. They understand perhaps the discrete steps needed to solve a problem. And Node-RED gives them the power to then start building and shaping that application with that understanding of the discrete steps, without them then needing to go and break out a programming book to learn, whatever, whether it's how do you sign an OAuth request to Twitter or whatever it might be. And it's that higher level of abstraction that makes it much more accessible to those users. So I think that's pretty much all for my talk. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you can see where Node-RED can fit within your development experience and your development tool chain. And I will just say once again, as an open source project, we exist through the community, and we shape what we do based on the feedback we receive from you guys. So if you've not played with it before, go and have a play. If you have played on it and there's something you don't like, let us know, because we can shape it based on the feedback you guys give us. We like it, we use it, and there's clearly something there. So yeah. Oh, a last minute question. Does it work properly on the ARM architecture? Well, the key thing is if you can install Node.js, you can install Node-RED. So ultimately that's the answer. So if you can find instructions for how to install Node.js on whatever device or bit of hardware you're interested in using it, if you get past that part, then Node-RED will run just fine. Thank you very much for attending. I hope it's been useful. Do get in touch if you'd like to chat some more about Node-RED. Thank you.